Yeah. All right, welcome, everyone. Welcome to my name is Anna Yang. I'm the Director of Environment Society Center at Chatham House. And welcome to this amazing panel, Connecting Investors to Frontiers of Bioeconomy Transition. So we have 1 hour, and we have Adriana Moreira, Head of Partnership Division at Global Environment Facility. And she's a personal hero of mine. So it's great to have you here. I also have Caitlin Clark, Director of Policy and External Affairs from BTG Pactual Timberland Investment Group, and Charlotte Blum, Senior Technology Policy Manager in R&D from Novonesis. So before I hand over to our speakers and also to Adriana to welcome us, just want to give you a very, very quick sort of context of why we're here. In order for us to achieve climate and nature objectives, we will need to phase away or phase out of fossil fuel, while at the same time increase value of nature by protecting nature and by restoring it. And many, including ourselves at Chatham House, think that bioeconomy, which is a sector and economic system that relies on biological resources, the bioeconomy sector has a potential to deliver both of these objectives. And we see a lot of increasing interest around the world with 50+ national and regional bioeconomy strategies. We also see a lot of innovation happening in the energy, food, and material systems. However, what we also see is that these innovations and these policy strategies are not they're fragmented, they're not connected, and they're often siloed. And we also know that all these innovations in energy, food, and material, they will compete for land, for water, and for cheap renewable energy. So we need to understand where there are synergies and where there are trade-offs. So what I would like to do today is just have a very open, honest conversation about how can policy, innovation, and investment work together to deliver the bioeconomy transition that we would like to have. With that, I'm going to hand over to Adriana.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome all to our pavilion. You know, we have this incredible opportunity to be having this event by the Chatham House here, and our pavilion is constituted by the JEF and the local conservation trust funds, being them national institutions or even some regional institutions. Currently, we have 118 of these institutions spread across the globe. The JEF has had the privilege, let's say, of creating and establishing 60 of these institutions. Some of them are 30 years now, like the Mexican Fund, who is celebrating 30 years. Fumbio, our fund in Brazil, will celebrate in 20 years. So very long-lasting investments. And this is part of our strategy in bioeconomy, because we believe that we need to have sustainable finance over time to really create change on the ground. We're really happy by hosting this event, and I thank you, I'm very happy to have an all-women panel. That's great. If you don't know, we have a pamphlet here that summarizes kind of JEF 101. But the JEF actually has evolved from the fund that was established during the Rio 92 to serve the 3 conventions of Rio, climate change, biodiversity, and the land degradation convention. And now is a family of funds. We serve more than 6 international agreements. And our focus is on supporting countries. We have 186 countries in the JEF family, being them donor countries and recipient countries, 144 recipient countries. And we work to support the countries in addressing the challenges of right now our triple crisis, no, as we're talking about, and addressing the use and the conservation of sustainable resources. And this discussion about the bioeconomy is at the heart of what we do, because one of our core missions is to serve also. We don't like to call them beneficiaries. They're actually allies in the implementation of our projects on the ground that are the indigenous peoples, the local communities, and the very important aspects of the stakeholders involved in the process of conserving and managing natural resources. And I think these are some of the groups that we need to look when we are thinking about structuring this new way of thinking about our global economy that we call the bioeconomy. So, and actually this side event is very important to us, the study developed by the Chatham House, because we are in the process, the JOF works through funding cycles. We are in 4 years funding cycles. We are at our 8th funding cycle, and we're moving now, about to start a whole discussion on the programming directions for the 9th cycle. And bioeconomy is going to be very important. And how do we define, okay, the new programs, the new strategy that we're going to discuss with countries, discuss with all the stakeholders that we have in the JEF family of funds. So this is very timely for us, and I think the aspects of innovation and how we finance that, I'm very curious to learn from my fellow panelists, and we certainly would appreciate the inputs from this distinguished group to our strategy starting next year. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the Jeff for hosting and Chatham House for coming up with this fantastic panel. Also really looking forward to learning from all of you. My name is Caitlin Clark. I lead policy and external affairs for BTG Pactual's Timberland Investment Group. For those of you who aren't familiar with BTG Pactual, it's the largest investment bank domiciled in Latin America. The Timberland Investment Group is a timberland and forestry specific asset manager, and we manage about 1.2 million hectares of timberland on behalf of institutional investors. So typically pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. So I would say we are sort of on the supply side of the bioeconomy, both in terms of producing materials for the material side of the bioeconomy, and on the kind of investment side. So thinking about the other ecosystem services and other services that forests can provide, good rural jobs, for example, water quality and water provision, biodiversity. So thinking through how these systems can provide all of those services in a broader mosaic that is leading into a more circular and sustainable bioeconomy is really at the core of what we're trying to lead at the Timberland Investment Group. So really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thank you also for inviting us as industry or a company that makes innovation. So I'm from a company in Denmark called Novonesis. It was Novozymes and Christian Hansen, and that recently merged, just in case some of you have heard about it. But and we are an industrial biotech company, and even though we are based in Denmark, then we are have a big global presence of both R&D and production and so on. So just to say, I'm not an economist. I have a scientist background, but now work more with technology policies in the company. And we make what we call biosolutions. So we make enzymes, proteins, microorganisms, and so on from bacteria and fungi. So these are really biological solutions that we use to sell. So we are business to business, sell for more than 30 different industries. For example, food, feed, bioenergy, biohealth, bioag, and others. So more than 30 industries that use our biological solutions. And yeah, you will have them in a lot of the daily stuff you eat every day and so on. And they are, they are, for example, used. So enzymes are used for the bioethanol production to make more sustainable fuel. They are used in textiles to make that less chemical intensive, that whole process. And also when you do your wash, we develop enzymes so you can wash at cold temperatures, which saves a lot of CO2 and also reduces chemicals because it replaces chemicals in the wash powder. And in food, we save a lot of food every year because when you add enzymes, which really many bakeries does, you keep the bread more fresh for longer so that it doesn't get dry the day after, and you throw it out, and you throw out both the plastic and the bread and everything. So this is also one of the solutions, and then a lot of industrial processes for making different things. You can use enzymes as processing agents to save water, energy, heat, many different things. So this is just to mention some of the things that our innovation is about. And we do that a lot together. We cannot do everything. We do innovation together with our customers a lot, and with in partnerships and in research collaborations and so on. And one example of a very recent innovation was a partner, Sapim, that came to us with an enzyme solution they had, and then together we have commercialized it. So this is a solution for CO2 capture. So you can capture CO2 from the emissions of industries. It's a very new technology, but personally I am very proud to be part of that transition. And then what I'm here for these weeks, that's a DSI discussion. So if you don't know what it is, it's about benefit sharing for use of digital information from nature. And this is really an example of where we have had to really fight for regulations that can support innovation. Because as you might know, the Nagoya Protocol is different rules in each individual country, and you cannot do efficient innovation with digital innovation with 200 different rules for each data point. So it's so hopefully this multilateral mechanism that is being developed, it's an example of what can really support innovation, and at the same time also mobilize resources for biodiversity. So this is just an example. I think that is how I would start.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe I will also talk quickly about a report, some research that we have been doing, and which leads to this report. You will have the postcards on your chair, and this is as a researcher, I would say that, obviously. It's just like, this is a labor of love and sweat and lots of tears, and also how do we square the question of bioeconomy, or how do we make sure that bioeconomy actually delivers what we want it to deliver. I think there's a lot of excitement about the concept of bioeconomy, and I'm also very excited about the concept of bioeconomy. But what we see from the research that we do is, if we don't put the safeguards in place, if we don't ensure that there is benefit sharing and there is partnership on the ground, then the bioeconomy transition may not be a good one. I think that's sort of a big message that we want people to remember. And as we do research, has been doing research in the space, we do see a lot of innovation happening. And the reason why we chose to look at innovation is for two reasons. One is because we see, as population will grow to 2 billion more people by mid-century, and we will need to have more urban spaces, more food for these people. What you see is increasing demand. And what we want to make sure is that this increased demand is a demand coming from a circular bio-based source instead of from a fossil fuel-based source, right? That's what we would like to see. And then the reason why we look at innovation is so that we can have a glimpse into the future shape of these bioeconomy transitions. And what we realize is that these innovations, we look specifically into the material just because of the demand trends. And what we see is there's a lot of innovation happening, but they're fragmented. And what we need to make sure is that these innovations are more connected either across the supply chain or cross-sector. That's one thing. The second thing is because of these lack of innovation and line policy, and you alluded to it, because there's so many different entry points, it really does hamper innovation. And the third point, which I also said, is whether it's innovation in the food, whether it's innovation in energy or material, they will all compete for land, for water, and for cheap renewable energy, right? And we really do not comprehend if you for example, in this paper, we pick 3 innovations as examples, just so that we pick CLT, cross-laminated timber, as a bio-based material. We picked first generation of bioplastic and an alternative protein. And we did a sort of projected scenario, 2 scenarios, one of low penetration of, I think, something like 10%, another of high penetration. And they do really, just 3 technologies, they all compete for a similar pot of land, water, and renewable energy. And so if we don't think about these things coordinated, and then also the job implications, they're all these synergistic but also competing elements, then we're actually not delivering what we're supposed to deliver. So, do read the report at your leisure. And one final thing I want to say is the need for cooperation, which I want to talk about here. But I also want to say something. Well, we can't do a Chatham House report without talking about geopolitics, right? That as we're seeing the world, moving into a more fragmented, less organized ordering, as we're moving away from a fossil fuel-based economy, so the power of the oil majors will shift, and those who owns the nature endowment could play a different role. But that's not a given, because it's not only about ownership, it's about access, and it's also about processing capability. So, and if we look at what Brazil could do, yes, Brazil owns a lot of land. I'm a Brazilian, so I'll say that, right? You have water and all of that. But if you don't invest in industrial policy, if you don't think about R&D innovation policies, if you don't think about different technological pathways that can drive the country to a portfolio of different kinds of bioeconomy, then the country, Brazil, may miss the opportunity to be one of the shapers of this bioeconomy transition. So I'll just end it there, but just to say it needs to be connected, right? We need to plan how these innovations are deployed, and that there are really interesting geopolitical or reordering as the world transition into bio-based. My question to the panelists is, how can policy and investment drive innovation?
Well, in the case of the GEF, I think we have some very specific entry points in this process. First, we are, like pioneers in financing large-scale conservation. So the sources where the forests, the savannas of the world, and the sources where the basis of the bioeconomy come from. No? So this is a very important pillar of the whole strategy. Also, as I mentioned, we started with the Field Trees Convention. There is this whole discussion about the new plastics agreement. We have a dedicated window to plastics. So that's where we come to finance. The other important thing is our clients, like the countries. And we focus a lot in developing capacities and bringing finance to the least developed countries that I think need to play a very important role on this. It's not just the middle income. We need to think about the seeds, because this is the kind of economy where these countries cannot be left behind. They have been left behind from the current economic model. So we really need to think deep about that. So this is one point that I want to make. Another point that we have a blended finance window, and that's very interesting in terms of the cooperation and the development of new ideas. We have been able to innovate. For example, we have a recent project approved in Brazil where we're working with one local Brazilian finance institution. The VERT Fund is women-run, by the way. and we are in this process fostering, it's a large scale because it's the Brazilian Amazon, and nothing about the Brazilian Amazon is small. We have a program there that has been running for over 22 years, the Amazon Region Protected Areas Program, that has 120 protected areas being financed with 63 million hectares. This is an area of equivalent to France and Germany put together. And there are more than 70,000 people living inside these protected areas. These are target groups for this innovation project that we have with a very well-known biocosmetics company in Brazil, Natura. And we're trying to tackle the issues related exactly to bringing these communities into this new bioeconomy through credit and technical assistance. And working at the scale they can manage. It's not the scale we envision. This is a very important point, and it might be missed when you're thinking about these big schemes, because the absorption capacity of these small and micro enterprises is highly relevant in how we develop these schemes. And I think this is a relatively small project, but I really think we can learn a lot. We're starting about it. It's a coalition, and this is also very important from the standpoint of developing alternative livelihoods on the territory and engaging these groups that have been apart from the formal economy to deliver products in a new paradigm of the bioeconomy with finance instruments that are adequate for these groups. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this, because this is part of my first point, my initial point in the least developed countries. And there are many least developed areas inside middle-income countries that we need to take into account and leaving them behind. One aspect of the bioeconomy that is going to be really a paradigm shift, not just in terms of innovation, but is in inclusion and equity. And this is really important for the goals of the JAF. And this is what we are looking forward to discussing and improving and scaling up our projects. Thank you.
I'll take a step, I think, much further back. And I guess I'll start by saying that my job didn't exist 5 years ago. And now this is a job thinking about policy related to nature and climate that increasingly does exist at asset managers. And that's because investors have become increasingly sophisticated in the way that they think about the impacts of their investments, especially in landscapes. And that's great. It's a really good sign. Investors want to know now that the things that they're investing in are nature positive, whatever the world ends up deciding that means. They want to know that they're good for climate. They want to know that they're not damaging indigenous peoples and local communities, and ideally uplifting those communities as well. They want to know that they're making some contribution to the equity agenda. So these are really good signs, and I think a really positive step forward. The frameworks for how investors can think about those things are still, I think, quite unsophisticated. And so from my point of view, the necessary, very high-level policy change that we need is to understand that lands exist in a mosaic of landscapes, and some of them need to be conserved. But we have tried sort of fenced-off conservation, and that doesn't work, and it's very bad for equity. And I think we need to have a better understanding of the role that working landscapes can play in this transition. And that's one of the things about the bioeconomy that I think offers a really powerful transition framework for just thinking about how lands sit in the economy. So we have, you can think of it as a spectrum from sort of strict preservation all the way through industrial scale production landscapes. And each part of that mosaic can be improved. Conservation areas can be made to support more jobs. Industrial production areas can be made to support biodiversity and other ecosystem provision services better. So I think that's a really powerful framework for the bioeconomy because it offers a vision of abundance where we can actually think about how these landscapes contribute to a world where people can thrive and nature can also be repaired. So my perspective on sort of what we need from policy is just sort of a recognition of that fact. We cannot go back to a state of nature in all places at all times, and there are a lot of ways in which that's not even desirable. But there are plenty of places that can. So what do we do with the ones that can't? And I think that's where this report, which I would really encourage everyone to read, I just did, it's really excellent, I think offers some really interesting pathways forward. One of the things I really like about it is what you term the economy of scope. So how do you crowd, it's a sort of thinking about how you crowd in more products or more returns, more financial returns, more jobs, more things into the same type of landscape or into the same type of financial product. And I think it's a really powerful framework. So I just want to congratulate you on the report, and thank you.
Is it on? Yeah. Yeah, I think what I would, one thing is how is this in relation to our own innovation? I mean, how can we continue to have that? But it can also be yeah, how to broaden it out. And what I can see from my experience on working with, because we are a big company, are well established and so on, so we know how to work with it, but we also know what the difficulties are and what we can see when, for example, research groups that eventually could become a spin-off in a developing country or smaller companies in developing countries and so on, when they reach out to us. And now I'm bringing back the Nagoya Protocol and so on into the picture again. And then because this is the first thing we ask about. I mean, for us, it's something we have been working with, and we have the resources to be in compliance and so on. But we have to be in compliance. And everybody that works with biology, or most that works with biology, they need to know about this. And it's really complicated to understand. And we have, unfortunately, most often have to say, we are sorry, we cannot collaborate because we cannot get the legal certainty. And but we can advise and say, where can you seek information and so on about this, so that you know how you need to document everything and be ready for an audit and so on. So kind of more simple rules for this, I think, would enable more smaller companies to start, and with help from the bigger companies and so on. Sometimes, right, we can do that also, support. Yeah. So I think that is.
No, I just wanted to make a comment exactly what you said, because also an important aspect of our work at the JEF is actually providing in countries what we call the enabling activities for the Biodiversity Convention. And it's exactly that, like the whole thing about the Nagoya Protocol and even the discussions that we have now in DSI. We have a whole line of funding for the countries to access, to create capacity. First to understand, and second for developing their own regulations according to what's decided at the global fora. So it's actually very applicable, and and this is one of the things that we serve these 144 countries with these funds, non-reimbursable funds, these donor funds, to really try to create this capacity to respond. And so this link with these more practical approaches and how we develop these frameworks, I think is something that we envision, and we want that, to work closely with the private sector and how we can help, the countries, and also in harmonization. That's another very important process in terms of the policies for the countries towards following these international agreements, because I think that creates an enabling environment for developing the paradigms of the bioeconomy. So this aspect I just want to highlight, because I think it's a very important aspect of our financing. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can also just add to that, another aspect is also that the policies needs to follow the technology development, because it's just moving so fast. Just 5 years ago, we worked in a very different way than what we do today, and the policies are not following that.
So while we're at policy, and then when we think about policy, I think we should think about policy in a very, very broad spectrum, right? We think about policy innovation in the land side, from how we manage land, what do you do with degraded land, how do you, also something else that we talked about in the report is when you deploy a lot of innovation and you actually have land saving, because how do you plan for the deployment of these saved land also matter, right? Where you actually maximize the restoration, reforestation capability. So when we think about innovation in policy, we think about them on the land side. We need to think about them on the supply chain processing capability side. We think about from, Charlotte's job is, I think, really, really, I didn't know that this kind of, your job existed, which is how do you think about policy that enables innovation, right? And also like a whole package of incentive that comes from like financial innovation. So can you give examples of what either cool things that you have seen or really barriers, I'm going to use another word, but we're in a public panel, barriers that you want to remove in whole policy package, because we kind of think about, I just want to encourage us to think about the whole full spectrum.
Well, in terms of example, I can tell you about how we moved in the JEF from working separate with biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, and creating what we call integrated programs, okay? Tackling all these windows, plus, the issue of pollution, the issue of water, and using the landscapes as a base, and also seascapes. So it's very important also the whole strategy of looking at seascapes. And it's more or less the same, you know, I should say, from the general standpoint, because you define set-aside areas, you know, for conservation. And what we're looking at is how we complement a top-down approach, let's say, to policies with a bottom-out approach with inclusion, and how they meet in the middle. And then we look at structuring what we call productive and protected landscapes and seascapes. You know, and this needs to be science-based. That's another important aspect for us at the Jeff, that we have a lot of science grounding our strategies, because we need to know, you know, for example, how much of the tropical forests we need to keep in order not to reach tipping points, you know, and completely havoc the entire processes, ecosystem processes. So, and this is something we still don't know. So, are we reaching a stage that we need to really restore? And where to restore is very important. A very important aspect of particularly landscapes is connectivity. And connectivity not only for connecting for the ecosystem processes, but connectivity for wildlife, for example. We just got this report about the incredible reductions on wildlife populations. You know, it's not only in terms of losing species, but also in terms of the actual numbers of individuals per species. You know, so becoming rare in the field. So we're going to have a world that still have a lot of species, but all of them are rare, you know, so because they are in small numbers. So this approach is at the basis what we call our integrated programs. We have 11 integrated programs looking at that. And in that, we work mostly with governments, but this evolution from thinking separate and going to an integrated approach, I think we also need to reach in terms of the global multilateral agreements, okay? Because we go to the climate change COP, we talk about nature-based solutions, we come to the biodiversity COP, we talk about climate impacts on biodiversity. So this, we need to integrate. We need to really integrate, and that's what I think the unity for that, and I'm very glad to hear that the private sector and the investment is thinking at the level of landscapes. I'd love to talk more about that, because I've been a practitioner of landscape planning, you know, for conservation and production and seascape. So I think this is integrate, because we need to have a unit, and the landscapes are the unit for this integration to happen.
Okay, I'll give a couple of just, I think, quick examples of types of policies. And when I say policy, I take a very broad view of that. So from sort of supranatural regulation to voluntary sort of industry-based sort of guidelines. And so I think the carbon market is actually a great example of both an enabler and a barrier to further action. And one of the things that makes the carbon market so interesting for us as land managers is that it enables us to find revenue streams for types of management that we might not be able to do if we were solely relying on traditional timber revenue. So that allows us to do some really exciting things with restoration, targeting sort of non-impact types of investment. That's the kind of thing that would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to do before that. One of the things that carbon markets are not good at is financing preservation of land that is not currently under threat because of additionality barriers. And so like that's one area where the carbon markets have really not helped very much. So that's one example. And I think there are a lot now of coalitions working on these types of issues. One notable one is the Forest Climate Leaders Partnership, which I think is now 17 different countries, including and the EU, in addition to the EU, that are thinking through various ways that forests and climate change and the economy interact, and thinking about how to support sort of more sustainable development in each of those sectors across a wide spectrum of various options. And one of those actually is to your point, Anna, about CLT, about greening construction with sustainable wood. And so thinking through what are the substitution benefits that increased use of CLT could bring to the construction sector, how can that sort of help with rural jobs? We've seen in the United States, it's actually a great way of bringing high-tech, high-paying jobs into rural mills because of the way that these pieces need to be cut at the mill. And it's been really helpful for sort of urban infill. It allows you to build up on top of existing structures, so you need less construction. It's much less dangerous for people who live in cities. It allows you to build denser in existing footprints, which actually has really important knock-on effects for example, the viability of mass transit. And so all of these other things that are great about mass timber that can come out of this sort of CLT transition, which I think is really exciting. So those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah, I will. Yes, I think I already mentioned one challenge. In the ability to do innovation based on biology, when you have all the different rules in different countries. So multilateral thinking there, not only for digital data, but also for the genetic resources, is definitely my hope for the future. I know it's very controversial, but that would enable more research to take place based on biology, and at the same time be able to protect it better, protect biodiversity better. As a company, there's definitely a lot of things we have to learn. And it's I heard we just did the first CRSD report, the EU kind of on, and it's that there are so many things that we don't know on how we impact biodiversity, how we can better protect it, how can we look at our supply chains. That there are of course something that we can see that we can do. Look at where we have our production, our operation, and so on. What can we do? And also involve ourselves in capacity building and work with the local area where we are. That's would be the most obvious, but it can also be not where we are present, but kind of work with. Support the capacity developments, but it's still something that we are really working hard right now to try to understand and build strategy and so on this. And again, we are a relatively large company, and we have some resources for this, right? And a lot of experience from the climate. We really built that, and we know how to work with all the CO2 and how to calculate and all this, but biodiversity is just a completely different thing than CO2 measurements. Yeah. So methods for that and support would also enable.
Very cool. We have around 10 minutes. I was gonna offer the opportunity for people to ask questions or comments. Adriana is a lot more inclusive than I am. Any taker, question, comments? Mark?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you to the panelists. My name is Mark Wishney. I work with Caitlin at BTG Pactual Timberland Investment Group. I guess I had a question, Anna. In your introductory remarks, I think you talked about safeguards. And I think if we think about a growing bioeconomy, what we're talking about in part is taking a massive global demand for goods and services, but really goods, and we're talking about trying to direct some of that massive demand now to our landscapes in new ways. And we want to do that because we want to accomplish all kinds of positive outcomes for climate, for biodiversity, for people. And of course, there's a lot of risk potentially involved in that. And there's sort of a school of thought that that's a high quality problem. We should sort of worry about that problem when we have that problem. Let's get the bioeconomy focus first. But I think that in reality, it's really a precursor, because without clear safeguards, the political will, the social license to take the steps necessary to drive that bioeconomy, the risks are simply too great to be acceptable. So I'm wondering how you all think about what can be done. I mean, these, in a sense, these are safeguards that we've been working as a global community to develop for many, many years in lots of other contexts around sustainable forestry, around regenerative agriculture, et cetera. So I'm interested if you have any thoughts about what we can do to get, and this is maybe directed first at Anna, because you raised it, and you've just done this great research report, but any others about how can we get those conditions in place so that we can get those safeguards in place that create the space then for the bioeconomy to develop?
Thanks. So, like you said, right, there are a lot of safeguards that we know that exist, right? There are some principles which is like whatever bioeconomy, whatever shape and form of bioeconomy transition that we're talking about, for us to ensure all the good stuff is, it should not lead to further nature conversion. That's right. That's absolute no. Like it should not. We can't afford that. Absolutely. And then there are like voluntary, like FSC and other standards on and other kind of agricultural practices that what you need to make sure that you do when you're managing the land. So I think those are the things that we already know. I was also alluding to the things that we don't know yet. And I'm especially talking about the land competition, where we are putting so many different kind of demand. Like we think about economy scope, like you need to make that land work harder, but at the same time, like what is the carrying capacity? What are all the different drivers in that piece of land? And ultimately, if that government, if that jurisdiction is in charge of that landscape, there, you know, if you look at a lot of jurisdictions, there isn't a land planning entity. And that's one of the biggest problems, right? When you see all those drivers and then we don't really understand where the different drivers of competitions are coming from, that's what I'm talking about. So some of the things, yes, we know. Other things we don't know because we can see trends of competition coming. And the point of the report is yes, great, but let's make sure then let's have a conversation around land competition as well, so that we are not then creating more problem than we have, And I think something else also is the circularity element. Like, let's not create more bioplastic, which then is it's a linear supply chain, right? So there are a lot of things that is happening in silos that we need to make sure that they're connected, because from us, it's like bioeconomy transition is a great opportunity, but let's make sure that let's not do it the wrong way.
No, I really like the comment, and I totally with you, and I just want to make one point. This is one of the paradigm shifts that I was talking about, because the way we developed safeguards were after the disaster. There was like, we need to get them as precursors. We need to get them as enablers of the new bioeconomy. And with this issue that I'm talking about, that's at the heart of the JEF financing, that's inclusion. Okay? So, and I'm not just thinking about inclusion of people, inclusion of countries. The LDCs, all the economies that were left behind, in the previous economic model. It must be like too much of, but that's highly relevant. Otherwise, we don't move. It's not a new paradigm. It's just redoing the same things the old way we did, and look where we ended up. So I think we need to see safeguards as enablers and as from the point of view of equity. And you know, and for me, I don't think that's so complicated if we use the landscape as a basis for the planning, for directing investments, for creating policies. And we have some very positive examples of this in many different countries, particularly about the zoning, about the defining areas for high intense agriculture area. And I want to just mention to you a very interesting thing that fascinates me. And you know, from Brazil, it's very funny because I was raised in a family where consuming meat was a way of indicating that we have climbed socially, you know, because we didn't used to eat meat. My father didn't eat meat, and for him it was very important to have meat every day in our beef, every day in our house, because it meant much more than protein, it meant wealth, okay? But we can transform the way we produce meat. Okay, and so the World Bank recently have a very interesting report on insect farming, but not insect farming to make my father and my family eat insects, but but to have the meals, you know, that now the plant protein is based on soybeans that are impacting, but having, like, if we achieve 50% of the plant-based protein produced in the world being produced by insect farming, and Africa is leading on that, Kenya is leading on that, and it's all based on women, small producers. You can produce 80 tons of insect protein in very small areas, in square meters, okay? But with this inclusion, it's a very interesting thing. I just wanted to mention that because it's one of our small little projects that for scaling up that encapsulates a lot what we're talking about here. This will create, only in South America, a very incredible amount of hectares that are going to be left to stop producing cattle. Just by doing this, changing the basis of our animal feed and having this proportion of 50% plant-based and 50% insect-based. Can you imagine that? Okay.
It's a little bit cheating for me to answer that since Mark and I work together. But I'm going to do it anyway. You don't have to agree. No, I definitely have to agree. But I do agree. And I think one of the most important ways, actually, that we can build that social license for the bioeconomy in general is through partnerships. And we work really closely with our friends at Conservation International and also at the Nature Conservancy. I think the environmental and social NGOs have such an important role to play in partnering with the private sector to help figure out, like, does this strategy make sense? Is this going to be the right way to move forward? Can we help understand what the potential impacts and benefits on Indigenous peoples and local communities would be? How does this fit into the landscape? And they can really provide the science, I think, that we need to make sure that our strategies are going to be most effective. So I think that's just a really important, and I think all of the sectors of the economy have an important role to play here. So, you know, asset managers, DFIs, private investors, NGOs.
All right, so we have 7 minutes. One thing I would like to ask you is, what is one, I don't know, I'm English. I'm trying to keep time or finish on time. Because she's like, don't be so English and start on time. I was like, but we're going to finish on time. I live in England now. What is one message you want everybody to take away from this discussion today?
Well, I think it's what we're thinking and dreaming here is doable. That's my first point. I want people, and I love learning from you. Really, I'm impressed, very impressed. It's the inclusion. I cannot emphasize enough how important not to leave indigenous peoples, local communities, and the poorest of the poor behind again. Okay, so that I think has to be a paradigm shift for this planet. And when we're thinking about that, I think we also need to stop thinking in separate buckets. Okay, it's very relevant when you're planning. It's highly, but we need to integrate the mechanisms, the elements of particularly climate change and biodiversity in order to move on it. Okay, that's my hope and my dream. But it's totally achievable. I really believe in our ingenuity and making this. This is our only planet, so if you don't do this, I always say that, because maybe we're going to be the first species that goes auto-extinct by its own doing. So it's a very bad record for us. Let's try to change that. Thank you.
I mean, that sounds like a great message to me. I'll try to make it a little more positive. Which is just to say that I think that the bioeconomy, and especially if we're thinking of it in terms of a circular and sustainable bioeconomy, offers a really powerful framework for solving the triple crisis. But it is going to require all of us to think about what we can do in our own capacities to make that work. And so that will look different for different people, but I think all of us have a responsibility to think about it. So,
Amazing.
Yeah, I was also thinking this is really something we have to do together. No one alone can solve this, and I mean, starting with the consumer, need to put pressure on those that can, on what they want to buy, what the impact is of what they buy and use and so on, and then I mean, because what we are developing, I mean, we will not develop something if our customers will not buy it, right? So, but we can influence our customers, and we also do that. We try to influence the industries to become more sustainable and so on. But I mean, we cannot force them to buy our products. But together we can influence. Yeah.
Amazing. So the phrase that's in my head, actually, there's an image in my head now. Maybe because I'm in a panel full of amazing women. You know that image of the four of that women, like, yes, we can? So that's the image that I have in my head, is like together, yes, we can, together. So that's only together, but with that image. So thank you so much. Thank you. Round of applause.
Thank you so much.